My name's Eugene. I have commercially fished all my life, third generation. One of the fellas that I work with now, he's fifth generation. So most of the fishery, most of the income from the fishery, you could say, came from eel fishing. But it did consist, which I'll do bits of as we go along, pike, bream, and pollen. But the majority would have been eels, and in the old days it would have been long lining. So what you had was, for the old people, it's a yard. For the young people, it's a metre. So every hook had a dropper every 5 metres or 5 yards, and the line consisted of about 350 hooks. And each person, who was the main permit holder and his helper, the helper would have rowed the boat while he would have baited line and lifted. They would have had a line each. They would have went out in the morning and they would have lifted yesterday's line of eels, which would have some bycatch, the odd perch, occasionally the odd trout, which was thrown back immediately. For some reason, they seemed to die easy on the line. I don't know why. But they did. That's my theory. And so when it would have taken about 2.5 hours to lift the line, they would have went to the shore, would have made a fire, had something to eat, and they would have made the line ready. The line would be lifted into a pile, and it would have then needed to be readied, hook by hook, and stabbed about 1 centimetre apart on rows on the tray. That then, they would have looked, or already, if what they used to do was have some worms in case you couldn't get perch fry or roach fry. The perch fry was the dynamite. That's the one that you would get a lot of fish. But if you couldn't get, if it was a bad day, if it was overcast, you couldn't get fry. So they would set worms. But I'm told in my day we could set them anytime. But in my father's day, worms were illegal. And the reason why was because they would catch a lot of small eels. The way around that was to be more specific where you put the eel line. But the modern day, that's the way it was done back in the day. As in my generation, in the late 70s, early 80s, fishing became a little more productive. The older generation would have used it as not recreational. It would have made money for them, but they would have always had something else to do to supplement their income. But our generation, we started to think ahead, and we got diesel boats, which meant that instead of just going out on nice days, you could go out, apart from a storm, you could go out and fish 7 days a week. But it also gave you the ability, in the mid-80s, there was depth sounders. And I'm going to give you the idea about why they were so influential. Back in the day, you just set a line straight, and you weren't sure what depth it was. Or once you got to the broad lock, you had no idea what the bottom was like. But the basic diode sounder in the early to mid-80s had a red light, a diode. And if it was 1 centimetre, it bounced a signal on the bottom. The length of time it took to come back up was the depth. And if once you got cute, the depth or the size of the light meant if it was 1 centimetre long, it was silt, soft bottom. If it was half an inch long, it was sand. If it was 1 inch long, it was rock. So already you knew the depth and you knew the type of bottom. And that is very, very important if you're looking to find where the fish are feeding and what depth. Depth is so important about catching eels. So if you imagine setting a line to see where they're fishing, what depth. So let's say, for argument's sake, you start off in 40 foot, you go to 140 foot, and you're looking the next morning and you're watching and you can see 80 feet, I'm getting more fish. So you go that evening and you set your line around the 80 feet. So instead of getting 5 stone to 1,000 hooks, you were getting 10 stone. So overnight, you doubled your catch. Same effort, same expense, but you doubled it. And that was the game changer where people of my generation actually made a full living from it. just by a simple depth sounder. And I mean, it was really, really basic. Now, long lining was the mainstay up to, I think we started about the late 70s. And it's called a Fyke, F-Y-K-E. It's a Dutch-made trap. It's about 20 inches high, 2 tunnel ends, trap ends, and a leader in between. The eel travels on the bottom, doesn't really like to come off the bottom. The first, he goes along, hits the wall of netting, and he goes either right or left, and he's into a cylinder with a tongue. And of course, the first tongue he goes into, he'll run the outer wall, thinking, no, but I'm getting away. So he goes into the middle tongue, and it's smaller, and he thinks, I'm getting away. Then he goes into the back tongue. The next thing he sees is me. Take it easy, can't get back out. They come in the late 70s, early 80s. Again, a very efficient way to catch. The beauty about the Fyke net was that everything was alive, nothing was hooked, and any accidental bycatch was alive. So you could throw it back, small eels, perch, wee trout, whatever, everything was alive, you could throw it back. So that was a good way to fish. Also, I'll talk a wee bit later about the fixed wing. The old Irish word for that is cathal, where you're fishing top to bottom, side to side for silver eels. Mature silver's going back to the sea. But there was also fishing for pike. You could long line for pike, and you could gill net for pike. We still can gill net for pike. The long lining for pike was abolished in, I think, the late 70s. But it was a very efficient way. It was all seasonal. You know, the long line fished really well till Christmas. Then the gill netting fished really well from Christmas to April in the old days. Now it's the 1st of March. But if I can and make sure I don't rant too long. The gill netting, the long lining for pike was efficient. What you used to do, you could take, you know, the 5 metres per dropper on your eel line, take one dropper off, and that meant you had 10 metres, because pike are more dispersed than eels. So it was, and the bait was harder to get in the winter time. So it was much, of course, you'd be using roach this size, and of course, back in the day, you could use them alive, which is totally illegal today. But that was a great method of fishing for pike up to Christmas. Then you went gill netting after Christmas to April. So there was also bream, gill netting for bream. Your bream would have been on the banks of, we call it a brew. You have 10 feet, 60 feet, and the slope between 10 and 60 is a brew. That's where the bream around 30 feet, that's where the bream would sit. And you would put your net on the 30 feet and you gill net them all day long. There was a good market for bream until the introduction of roach. The roach ate the same food, but there was, after 4 or 5 years, they were introduced in the late 60s, early 70s. After about 4 to 5 years, there was 1,000 roach for every bream. They were eating the same food, so the bream started to, instead of being 10 and 12 pound weight at full maturity, they ended up, today they're about 4 to 5 pound. You could draft net for bream as well. I remember doing it as a boy, but our bream became so small that the market, they weren't good enough for the edible market. And so we didn't really achieve it. Around wartime, it was brilliant. I remember my father telling me they could go out and maybe get 500 or 600 weight of bream in a night. And you were getting a tanner of bream. Can you imagine what a tanner, 50p, was worth around the wartime? It was, I think, a week's wages would have been £1, just maybe £2. So there was a lot of fishermen made a lot of money around the wartime. All these fish went to Billingsgate in England by train. Everything came to Enniskillen, created to Billingsgate. I've covered the long line.
Talk a little bit about the trap and transport.
I was going to use that at the end, Nigel.
We've heard mention of the outer boards. Was that ever around?
Well, now, allegedly, my father's generation were legally entitled to trawl a bait line with maybe 20 baits on it between two boats. You could get a license to do that. But the people that couldn't or didn't have or didn't want two boats used another board, allegedly. And so they could do it on their own. But they could sell them commercially up till about the 60s, I think. It stopped in the 60s. But the eel, as I said about the eel fishing, it would have made up the majority of the commercial income, about 80%. And if you were good at it, but as I said again, I can't come back any. You imagine out in a clinker rowboat and it's 40 mile an hour wind. I tell you, you're not going to go far. But the diesel boat, you could go out in just about any condition. Your depth sounder doubled your. If you had a brain cell working, it doubled your catch overnight. And you never got a bad catch. So that's how my generation made a full living. We were the first generation to make a full living from eel fishing, supplemented by pike. Now the pollen, you could get a net for pollen, and pollen is indigenous to the lower lake, but only in certain areas. And people in the old days would have netted them, and they would have, I think the word was called hawking, where you travel the road on your bike or your horse and cart or donkey and cart or whatever, and you went to houses and you said, buy pollen. And a few of the shops, one of the shops, remember O'Reilly's, which is the cornerstone now, they had a grocery shop and a pub, and they used to sell pollen from the shop, my father told me. But our way of using the pollen would be between the two 12ths, 12th of July, 12th of August. You would have fished Maho, the deepest part of the lower Lough Erne, and you would have cut your pollen about the size of a sugar cube, and you left that in the sun for 30 minutes. They used to come a little oil onto the pollen, and that stop at a half an hour, that was it. And the nicest, beautifulest eel that you will ever catch was on the cut pollen. And it, of course, was a free bait, so it was everything, as much things as you can get free, the better. Chapel transport now, Nigel?
Yeah, go on a bit.
This is what we do. Listen, the traditional fishery closed down in 2009. It was closed down for political reasons, not, well, the European eel is in decline, no doubt about it. But, so it stopped in the south first, we were then stopped. And the ASB were told by Europe that they had to employ commercial fishermen to trap, and they would then transport the silver eel, the mature eel, down to the sea. Now, I'll give you a breakdown on the silver eel. The brown eel, or when the elvers come into freshwater, they are, this is being kind of unpolitically correct, they're asexual, they're neither male nor female. For 2 years, they decide, is this water good enough for me to be female? Because females make up the majority of the... Some lakes have more males than females. Now this is the science. People tell me this is not my knowledge, this is the science. But, so after 2 years, Lough Erne, we're lucky because about 70% of our eels are female. And a female can be a metre long and at least a kilo in weight. The scientists tell me that the female, when she is ready to go to sea, she has 1 million eggs in her. Now the males are about 10 to 12 inches long and about the thickness of my finger. Now, the females will only tolerate the males when they're silver, ready to go back for the big party in the Sargasso Sea, 4,000 miles away. A year before that, Mr. Male was food for the big female.
Yes.
Yeah. And I knew a few women when I was growing up. Very similar to that. Yes? Shouldn't have really said that, should I? But so today from 2010, the employed people like myself and Roy Shaw, we fish at Katora and at the Friars Leap. So our fixed wing nets, but the Irish word for it is cahill. So our nets are under each arch eye, and they're top to bottom, side to side. So when the eels are migrating in the flow, we trap them. Again, everything that we catch, accidental bycatch, it's all alive and well and is returned to the water. Last year was our best year. We got 15.5 tonne, which is a lot of eels, but at the minute we've only 1 tonne. And this time last year we had 3.5 tonne. So you can see this is all weather permitted now. I'm praying nightly for rain. What fell today was only a mizzle. I need between 75 and 100 mil because the ground is still quite dry. So, but that's what we do at the moment. We can gill net for pike in the winter time, December, January and February, but that's on the lower lake only now. It was closed on the upper lake to facilitate our French friends. We used to be able to gill net on the upper lake and it was closed to allow angling for pike as a recreational sport and not a commercial sport, or commercial living, sorry. So we can still do it. We are allowed to do it on the lower lake as protection for the only large game fishery that Deira have, which is Lower Lough Erne. So they want between 8 and 10 tonne per year removed for the protection of the trout, because the pike is a bottom feeder and trout is top feeder. Pike has a very high speed. Trout has endurance speed, but in the first few seconds, if the trout or if the pike can get him, he's gone. The majority of the regurgitated fish, if you put 20 pike in a box, they will regurgitate what they have just eaten, and there will be at least 7 to 8 trout regurgitated out of 20 pike, and that's a fact. And that goes on year by year. Nobody can argue that. Some regurgitated roach, not so many now because roach are in massive decline because of the zebra mussel is doing to the roach what the roach did to the bream. In the late 60s, early 70s, the roach were introduced and they ate the same food, shrimps, copepods. So the bream were starved into submission. Now, with the zebra mussel accidentally introduced into the lake, it filters algae, and the phytoplankton and zooplankton that the shrimp and copepods feed on, so there's less of them because of the zebra mussel. So the zebra mussel has now done to the roach what the roach did to the bream. And the biggest problem this lake has is invasive species, including plants and weeds. This lake is nothing, it's a shadow of what I was, and I'm only 63. It's only a shadow of what it was, unfortunately. I'm sure, Joan, in your day it was even cleaner than that, before flush toilets. Not going any further with that.
Okay, yeah, time for a couple of questions, if anyone.
Anybody want to be question?
Microphone.
That's great, Eugene. Thank you. That's really fascinating. I think it's really important, your point there about Lough Erne being a shadow of what it was in the past. And I think it's really important that we all recognise that we do have a great habit of saying Fermanagh is a beautiful place, and it is a beautiful place. But there are lots and lots of problems going on under the water, particularly in Lough Erne. The invasive plants, the invasive bivalves, the invasive fish species. A lot of those fish species you're talking about not native. Yeah. And I think too that we often, the world we grew up in, we think the world has always been that way. And generations in the future will not remember the things that Eugene's talking about and the things that Joan would have talked about. So it's really important. I think probably the most important thing that I think about in that regard, it wasn't really a commercial fishery, is in terms of the salmon in the Erne system. And the Erne was described as one of the finest summer salmon fishery in the UK in the 1912. Mm-hmm. And now there aren't any, basically there are no wild salmon left in the Erne system. And that's in the space of a little over 100 years. Yeah. So I think that's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact of what we've lost and how to try and get back to what we maybe once had.
Yeah, it's the same sort of question. Presume your father would have been fishing before and after the hydroelectric plant to Millis.
Yes.
How much of a difference has that made? I know there's all this issue with the you catch for transport and would you actually transport them and
well, when my father was young, they lived close to the Cam River. Now the Cam River's on the upper lake. My father was born in Derry, well, not Ninny. And he said to me that in a warm night they'd have the windows open and the salmon used to keep them awake jumping in the Cam River. That's nothing compared to the Swad and the Colebrook and all those big, big rivers. Can you imagine the tens of thousands of salmon that was in those rivers if they were in the wee Cam River?
It's like Newton's book, which I've ever read, Fisherman in Erne, and they describe this is an English language fiction there, like 1850 or something.
Yeah.
And they describe that the crews were sitting on the rocks at the falls, and they just leave them there. They'd only pick up the second run fish.
The second run fish, yeah.
They leave the roots behind.
It's can you imagine the revenue? I think every rod caught salmon in Scotland's worth 5,000 to the community. Can you imagine 500,000 salmon in the Erne? What that would be worth?
Can you imagine a salmon fishery in front of the castle? And what that would be worth?
There was, now, indeed, you know, if you go prehistorically, there was eel weirs. If you look at the Weirs Bridge up near the Killyhaven, that belonged to the Belmore estate, and they had a fishery there. It was a very basic silver eel, a very primitive version of what Roy and I do at the minute, and it was guiding the eels with some kind of probably wood skewers that would have guided them into like a tank. But yeah, and there was one at Roscoe. I'm sure there was one on the Upper Lake, several on the Upper Lake, around Belial or Crum.
One of the big issues when they were building the power station was buying up the eel weirs.
Yeah.
They were on the river. That cost them probably more.
Is that right? Yeah. But it was gentry that owned and run the eel weirs. Sorry.
When we got at the time, I passed you all the time with Lough Erne.
Yeah.
Never heard your talk before, but thanks very much. And how many families would have been at the height of commercial eel fishing?
I suppose I should have said some. I mean, before the war, there was 30 families fished on the Bow Island. Just the Bow Island. I'm sure Enniskillen, if there was some of the people, Peter Taylor's grandfather would have been able to tell you exactly. I'm sure Enniskillen had the same.
Commercial.
Yes, but you see, again, it was only, most fishermen had a wee bit of land, or they built boats, or they did something else to facilitate. Their fishing was just small, enough just to tide over with something else. My generation was the first that actually made a full living from it.
Was there many families when it was finishing up then whenever it was shot?
Right, there was, when I was young there was 28 permits, there was about 18 active. I think there was about 8, when it was closed down there was 8. Now there's only 2, myself and Roy.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they're going to, Dara tried for 40 years to eliminate commercial fishing. And somebody had a wee light bulb moment there about 3-4 years ago and said, oh, there's only 2 people left here. Who are we going to get to take these 8 to 10 tonne of pike out of the lower lake? Who are we going to get to do that? Knows how to do it. So now they're panicking. They're trying to get me some kind of a thing to keep me alive for the next 40 or 50 years. and Roy. But from one thing to the complete reversal, and the knowledge that we have and the experience we have, it's gone. Ask anybody how they would hang a net. Your pollen net the netting was 100 metres long. It was hung to 40, so you had 100 metres netting hung to 40. Your bream net, it was 100 metres long. It was 12 inch. It was 100 metres long, hung to 33, so it tangled more than gilled. Your pike net, 100 metres long, it was hung to 50. Trout, only we never did that, allegedly. It would have hung to 40 as well, but it would have been 8 inch. The pike's 10 inch, bream was 12 inch. And again, it would take about 4 or 5 hours to make a net, if you knew how to do it. And if you were to pay, if you look at the nets that we use at Patora and down at the Friars Leap, each net, if you got it made in Killybegs, would be 10 grand. we buy 1,000 quid worth of material, spend a week working on it. So we've saved £9,000 by being able to do it, make it ourselves. So where's that going to go? Okay, it's travel transport.
On your net, you see things like that. There's a place up at Breed Castle in County Donegal.
Yeah, that's where we bought our netting.
Yes, I was
McGarry's.
a couple of years ago. We actually had a trip up.
Yes.
So it comes to Lough Erne Heritage
Breed Castle, yeah.
Fascinating to see that.
Yeah.
And just a quick one now.
Okay.
How are we going to get rid of the zebra mussels?
It's not. They closed down nuclear power stations in North America because they couldn't, the cooling plants, the zebra mussel was sticking to them and they couldn't get the nuclear things cooled. So they closed billions and billions of dollars worth of nuclear plants closed down because of zebra mussel. And the Americans couldn't do nothing about it. It's like COVID. As long as there's water here, there'll be zebra mussels.
Oh, I think.
Just like COVID. As long as there's humankind, there'll be COVID.
Okay, on that happy note.
I'm a realist. I'm a realist.
Okay, we've one more fabulous speaker to go, so if you've more questions.